One of the things that I am consistently taken by in the story of Palm Sunday and the week that follows is all the characters, all the perspectives, all the questions, the few that we have answers for and the most that we don't have answers for, the answers we work to invent, and the unknowing we continue to live with even as we grasp onto the answers we try to piece together. Particularly on Palm Sunday, we find this story of Christ, it's coming to a head, and it becomes clear that even those who know Christ intimately have a difficult time and have different thoughts on what ought to be next. And even those who have dedicated their lives to the study of the law and the prophets and the history leading up to this moment, they have trouble understanding what Christ is up to. And even the religious leaders who are Protestants are notorious for deriding the religious leaders, but they probably loved their community deeply and were trying to cultivate a peaceful space to keep their faith under a harsh Roman rule. Even these religious leaders whose job was to keep track of the intertwining pulse of the heart of God and the pulse of the people, even they didn't quite understand what was happening. And every year, people like me stand in places like this and pretend to know. And maybe we do know some things. I went to school for a long time to know some things. But if we are duly honest and duly humble, we stand here on this day, on the verge of this week, and we own our unknowing. You have maybe noticed me sort of sidestepping the interpretation of the Palms, meeting with the Passion, these last 5 Palm Passion Sundays together. We've had a reader's theater or my amateur home film production the last 2 years. I do this because it creates space for all of our unknowing to dance together and draw us closer to knowing, and wonderfully to draw us into the mystery of our shared wondering in the midst of unknowing. I've quoted my pastor from seminary to you all many times. He faithfully said, "All of us are smarter than one of us." Or, drawing from my Quaker background, we all see Christ when we share what we see as Spirit prompts us. So this year, I've invited a few folks to share their perspective on this story. I invited all of them to read a quote from Dr. King and an excerpt from a Borg and Crossan book, their attempt to know this story. And then each has brought their own experience of this story from this shared base. As background for their sharing and mine after theirs, Borg and Crossan suggest that it is highly likely that on the same day as Christ processes into Jerusalem on a donkey, a symbol of peace and humility, Pilate would have processed into Jerusalem with a military parade. As Christ is processing on this day to remember the liberation of his people from slavery and oppression, Pilate would have been processing to remind the people that they are not liberated and that they would be wise not to imagine a repeat of what happened under Egyptian rule. Pilate would have processed to remind the people that Caesar is Lord. When the Pharisees ask Jesus not to process, when they ask him to quiet the people, they are rightly afraid of Roman violence in response to the hope of the people. As Jesus enters Jerusalem, he intentionally sits down intimately with risk. And so today, as we continue to both wonder about the future and wait for it, we wait with risk. I invite us to hold a moment of quiet, sitting intentionally and intimately with risk. Imagine that risk sits down next to you and waits for your consent to hold hands. And now I'd like to invite Chad, Marcia, and Kurt to share their thoughts on this passage.